We'll go ahead and have our mayor in a minute. And today I've asked the mayor of Taylorsville, Mayor Overson. So if you're willing, come talk into the microphone and just answer those few questions.
You betcha. Good afternoon. I am happy to be here. Christy Overson, Mayor of Taylorsville. I'll tell you just a few things about myself. Got a cheat sheet here, favorite pastime or hobby. I really right now am enjoying figuring out all the blood that courses through my veins, where it comes from. So I'm deep into my ancestors and history. So that's something that's important to me. I can't think of the last movie that I've watched. You know, who has time to go to a movie? 7.5 hour nights, and we have awesome bands there. So I'm not sure that I have a favorite. The book I'm reading, and maybe you can tell me if this is going to be worth it or not. I'm reading Ken Follett's Evening and the Morning. Just starting to get into it, and it's Viking and about 900. The year is 900. Not so sure. Trying to grab hold of that. We'll see. The trip I've taken, I did take a little trip this morning. I like to ride my bike, and I try to get up early and get going so that I can ride and come back and get to work on time. And this morning I got on my bike and it was dark, and I have a light, a light in the front, and I've got a reflector on my backpack, and I started going, and I thought something's wrong here. I hadn't turned on the light, so I'm turning on the headlight. And so I took a trip, and I was one with the pavement, but here I am. I'm fine, just a little bit of a scraped ankle and an elbow, but I love to bike ride, and that helps me with my downtime or get started with the day. Something cool I've done, I don't know. I mean, we work, we go home, we eat, we sleep, we get up the next day and do it again. I'm living vicariously right now. My husband is over in Norway, Copenhagen, England, doing that lifelong trip. Only he's there, not with me, but with two of our children. And so I'm living vicariously through that. And I don't know that a turning point that I have in my life. I'm just happy to be here, awake, alive, and in one piece, and really super enjoy what I'm doing. Taylorsville rocks. We are a great city, and I'm happy to be the leader at this time right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Overson. So in our family, everyone's heard all the time. So if you need some good recommendations for ice packs, all kinds of ice machines that compress and circulate at the same time, I'm your gal. We're going to go ahead and just follow through with the agenda. For those of you that don't have it, there will be 9 items on it, and the 10th will be to adjourn. So at this time, we'll just start with item number 2, which is staff updates. And I'll turn the time over to Justin.
Person, am I in charge of the slides, or maybe? Okay, perfect. All right, so we've added a few staffers since we saw you last. Hello. So have you raise your hands, and maybe I'll have you run up really quick to the front. But Jared Tingy, raise your hand and come on up front. Cassidy, you're up in a second, so get ready. So Jared Tinger is our new legal director. This is a new position that we created. He will be on the advocacy team. And Jared, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're coming from?
Sounds good. So thank you for being here and being a part of the league. I'm excited to meet each of you. Originally I started off with Duchesne County as a deputy county attorney, and then moved from there over to West Jordan. So I've been there for the last 5 years or so, and really enjoyed my time there. I have 3 kids and an amazing wife, and I enjoy hunting, and I try my best to fish, but I'm terrible at it. But I enjoy it. I have a lot of hope that someday a fish will decide to take my bait. So that's me.
Okay, perfect. And next, Cassidy Hansen. Cassidy is our new marketing and communications manager. And you're going to see a theme here about where we're poaching people from. But Cassidy, tell us about yourself, where you're coming from.
Hi, I'm Cassidy. I also came from West Jordan, but I want everyone to know that I accepted my offer before Jared did, I think. But anyways, before that, I went to graduate school at Purdue where I learned more about political communication and different tools you can use for communication, whether it be data, geography, and things like that. And then before that, I worked for LRGC and I proofread draft legislation. So I've been in the Utah politics scene for a little bit. So that's me. I like skiing, being in the outdoors. I'm an amateur house plant caretaker. Those are some things I'm interested in.
Very good. And then finally, I'm not going to make Gary come up here, but Gary Watcott is officially fully on board with the league staff. He's serving as our senior advisor and going to be overseeing the local administrator advisor program, as well as helping us out on some other policy issues that we'll certainly have him work on. So that, Mayor, of policies and resolutions, do you want me to take, or do you want to come up and talk about it? Okay, I will go for it. Thank you. All right. And Roger, I'm going to have you come up here in just 1 second, just to talk about what the process looks like. So policies and resolutions, resolutions. So we've had 2 resolutions submitted, and here's where we're at in the process. First, drafts of the resolutions are prepared and sent to the ULCT staff. So we received 2 of those resolutions. The resolutions are then shared with the LPC for review. So we have a policy review committee, or whatever the thing's officially called, and that policy committee is the LPC. So you may not have known that, but you're serving a dual role, both as LPC members, but then to review these policies. Now, in previous years, we have had our annual conference later in September or early October. This year, our conference is only a month away. That's right. If you didn't know, our conference is going to be right after Labor Day, so 6th, 7th, and 8th of September. And also, if you haven't registered yet, please do that this week. It's coming up quickly, and we'd love to see how many people are showing up. But that is at the business meeting during our conferences when we adopt those policy resolutions. So what we would oftentimes do is we'll bring the resolution here to the LPC for consideration and for ratification before we take that to the business session during our annual conference. Now, because we have a little bit of a tighter time frame this year, what we're doing today is we're letting you know that the resolutions are there. We shared those with you in the materials. We have them in the back of the room, and we would like to get a little bit of feedback, and then we'll ask for volunteers to help us wordsmith that over the course of the next month before we get to our annual conference. So first off, we have, Molly, I'll have you come talk about this one real quick. We have our resolution on dignity and civility, and then we'll talk about our resolution on preemption. So Molly, I'll turn it over to you for the first one.
Do we have this linked? Yes.
Nope. It's already open in browser, guys. It's fine. Let's see, I just need to get the Zoom. There we go. Excellent. So as you know, hopefully at our mid-year convention, we collaborated with the Dignity Index and Unite to have Tim Schreiber come speak. And it was very well received, and we received a lot of other feedback from our members that they would like to see the league do more within the dignity and civility space. And so to that end, league staff has been working on a draft resolution. The league board of directors has endorsed it, so this resolution is being sponsored by the board, speaking to dignity and civility in our public discourse. We need to run it by LPC. Hopefully you have all had a moment to read this and look through it. We received some edits from the board this morning that we will be making. So if there are any edits or amendments from this body that we need to consider as well, we'd love to hear them now. Or if you have any other notes, just feel free to email them to me and we'll go with that. So with that, we're open to any changes or amendments that you would like to see with this resolution. Yes, Mayor. Doing the mic for the mayor. Oh, he's just coming up here.
So I suspect that many of you were at our league board meeting this morning, right before this, but the nature of the amendments that the board proposed was to change some of the wording of the resolution so that it is more it isn't as quite as mandatory or harsh, but it is more encouraging that communities should adopt civility resolutions. And we think that actually, with respect to some communities, will be better received than an order, and also it may protect some communities if they decide not to do this from being challenged. So the amendments don't affect the substance of the resolution, but given the reaction that we had to the dignity index speaker that we had at the semi-annual convention, and just anecdotally about our experiences, we thought this is something that the board should get behind and actually advocate from a leadership position. So that's what that's about.
Sure. So as of right now, the entire resolution, Mayor? Sure. All right. So I'm just going to start. Title: A resolution on the need for dignity and civility in local politics. Again, it'll be sponsored by the League Board of Directors. So whereas the Utah League of Cities and Towns is committed to promoting effective and ethical governance at the local government level, and whereas the cornerstone of a healthy democratic process is respectful and constructive discourse, even when we disagree among elected officials, community leaders, and the public they serve, and whereas the recent rise in divisive rhetoric and hostile behaviors in public discourse has led to increased polarization and decline in public trust in all levels of government, and whereas the leadership and membership of the Utah League of Cities and Towns recognizes the importance of fostering an environment of dignity and civility within political discourse to encourage a meaningful dialogue and collaboration, and whereas Governor Spencer Cox, who is the 2023-2024 chair of the National Governors Association, has initiated a bipartisan initiative called Disagree Better for governors to work through conflicts and seek solutions to difficult policy challenges. And whereas local elected officials at the local level play a crucial role in shaping policies that directly impact the lives of their constituents, and this is where one of the changes is. So whereas the Utah League of Cities and Towns acknowledges that upholding dignity and civility in local politics is essential to maintaining the credibility and effectiveness of local government as a whole, and local leaders should lead by example in disagreeing better and promoting respectful, dignified, and inclusive communication. So that was previously a must. We're looking at changing it to like a should or strive. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Utah League of Cities and Towns that we advocate for the following principles to promote dignity and civility in politics. Number one, disagree better. We strive to disagree better in order to facilitate difficult conversations, resolve conflicts, overcome the fear of retaliation or personal attacks, and build consensus to solve our policy challenges. Two, and this is where the second one was, code of conduct. Originally we recommend that local governments adopt a code of conduct. We don't want to put any kind of mandate in there, especially if it may not be followed. We don't want to kind of compromise the strength of the league. So we say we invite local governments to consider adopting a code of conduct that sets clear expectations for elected officials' behavior during public meetings, social media interactions, and other forums where political discussions take place. Number three, training and education. We promote ongoing training and education for elected officials, staff, and community members on effective and dignified communication, conflict resolution, and strategies for maintaining civility and inclusivity in political discussions. For dignified and inclusive dialogue, we encourage all elected officials and stakeholders to prioritize constructive dialogue over personal attacks or divisive language when discussing policy matters, and to actively listen to different perspectives with an open mind. 5, public awareness campaign. We support initiatives that raise public awareness about the importance of dignity and civility in local politics, emphasizing the need for collaborative problem solving and the rejection of harmful rhetoric. 6, recognize positive role models. We acknowledge and celebrate local leaders who exemplify the values of dignity and civility in their political interactions, setting a positive example for others to follow. Be it further resolved that copies of this resolution will be sent to all member cities, metro townships, and towns, inviting them to endorse and implement these principles and concepts within their respective communities. So if you have any notes, we can chat about them quickly here, or drop me a line and we can incorporate any feedback with the group. All right, thank you.
All right, our second, and again, if you need a copy of these resolutions and you really want a paper copy, we do have a bunch of them in the back of the room. If you raise your hand, we can run one over to you. We've also got the links up. Our next resolution, if I can pull up the right one. Yep. This resolution comes to us, and I know this has been circulated to a lot of you already. So I'm gonna ask Councilmember Bradshaw and Councilmember Dugan to come up and talk about this resolution, the genesis of it, and yes, I called you Councilmember Bradshaw in this setting. I know it weirded you out, I can see. But talk about the impetus for this resolution and what we're looking to do with it.
Good afternoon. I'm Councilmember Dan Dugan from Salt Lake City. And first, I just want to say thank you to all the inputs that we got from across the league. It was wonderful to see all those inputs, and it was wonderful to put them all together. And I appreciate all that effort. And I'm just going to really turn the time over to Councilmember Bradshaw.
Why are we so formal?
I just like saying that right now. It's a resolution. Yeah. Go right ahead.
I know. Well, you introduce some whereases, and all of a sudden it's really formal. Hey everyone, it's Kate. So Councilmember Dugan and I conspired on this resolution based on some concerns that we kind of jointly shared in dealing with the legislature. And given my role on the board representing Area 2, which is mostly Davis County, I've circulated this to my colleagues in local government in Davis County, and some of their feedback has already been incorporated. But the purpose of this resolution, and being very aware that resolutions are, often glanced at and then moved to the pile for recycling. With all of that being in mind, we thought it was important to still make a policy statement about the role that local government plays and the reasons why local government is important, and to share that with our legislative colleagues, and also to use it as directive for our league staff in terms of their lobbying engagement at the state capitol. So it's kind of serves both of those purposes. If you'd like me to, I'm happy to read the full thing. But I would point out two whereas clauses that I particularly like, and both of these are whereas clauses that one of my colleagues in North Salt Lake may recognize, because it was some feedback that they gave that we incorporated. So whereas number 7, whereas the state preemption threatens the principles of self-governance and local trust in both state and local government. I feel like that was a great contribution and something that's incredibly important. I'm sure you've all had the experience I've had, where we are having a public hearing, we're required to have that public hearing, but there isn't really a question of whether or not the action that the public is there to give us feedback on is going to happen or not, because we don't have any control. We've been preempted. And I think that erosion of the public feeling like we've asked them to come, we've noticed them to come, but there really isn't going to be a discussion or a potential shift in outcome based on the will of the community, is something that erodes this feeling of connection between our residents and us. And hopefully it's something that the legislature will understand the value of being cognizant of. And the other one is whereas number 11, and that is whereas state preemption hinders innovation and experimentation for the 248 cities and towns in the state, thus impeding progress and inhibiting the development of creative solutions to complex problems. In any political science class, we talk about how the 50 states are the laboratories of democracy, and this is how we look at different ways to solve problems, and then can decide which thing works best and adopt best practices. And I feel like sometimes what we miss is that in our cities, there are lots of different ways of of doing things. And we are often very good at solving complex problems on a local level, on a small level. And then we're really great at collaborating. You know, just today when I arrived, you know, I was connecting with Mike Winder to ask him about how it's going with his, you know, disco roller skating at his Mill Creek Commons this summer. That is based on an idea that he got from Bountiful, that is based on an idea that we got from Harriman on ice ribbons. And so I was interested in how his summer programming is going and whether that pencils. My city's recently engaged in a municipal fiber, and we've talked with a lot of you that have either are a Utopia city or picked a different path with Google Fiber or other systems in order to get your feedback and incorporate it. And I think the legislature, sometimes in giving us a one-size-fits-all policy, misses the fact that we have different ways of doing things in all of our 248 cities, and it can lead to really great outcomes, and then we can collaborate to make sure that we are being great stewards of the resources in our care and being responsive to the people of our communities. So with that, Mr. Lee, would you like to return to this formal podium to finish this process?
Thank you, esteemed council member. Appreciate that. So, any questions? Wow, the wave. Any questions or comments on this? So, Mayor Kafusi, we are going to need to take a vote just to move forward and get a to approve the idea of having a working group on both of these. But process-wise, the idea really is now to approve these moving forward. Timing-wise, we will need to take a final vote on this before we get to our annual conference at the business session. That is going to be a very quick Zoom meeting that week right before the annual conference, either on the 5th. And if you're saying, but that's primary day, you're right, it is. The 5th or maybe even the morning of the 6th, we're going to work that out. But we'll just need to do a quick Zoom meeting once we have the final language to approve that with a 2/3 vote. Roger gave me the head nod, so I got that right. Right before then. So Mayor, we just need to have a vote to move these forward and put together some work groups.
Do we do them one at a time or both at the same time?
I think one at a time.
Okay. All right, then I'll take a motion to move forward the preemption resolution. Mayor Silverstream, we have a motion. I need a second. Thank you. We have a second. Any questions or concerns? Yes.
What was the discussion regarding how? What was the discussion regarding how the legislature will perceive this? That's my only concern is. First, do no harm.
The earlier drafts of these candidly were pretty pointed, and as an ex-legislator myself, I gave some suggestions which made it through. And so it's actually in a way that the final version is a way that's still pretty bold, but isn't condescending or offensive. And I think it will be a strong statement, but not entirely unexpected. So I don't think we're going to be ruffling feathers too badly with it. But we do make a clear line in the sand, which is something we as the league should do. Good question, you're making.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, I'll call it to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. All right, now we'll need a motion to accept the dignity, civility, and local politics resolution. And just as a reminder, this one will has a little bit of time that we're gonna work through it a little bit. All right, right here. Okay, a motion, a second, Mayor Tran, thank you. Any discussion? All right, that said, I'll call to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries on this one as well. And again, we will be setting out a Zoom to jump on for not even an hour, right?
Oh, far less.
Come on, Justin.
Like 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay, you heard it here. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Roger. Come on up, Raj. I will say, as a reminder, if you want to be a part of the work groups that are going to be wordsmithing these, for the dignity one, reach out to Molly. For the preemption one, reach out to me. My email, jlee@ulct.org. You didn't know it.
Is that Mr. J?
Mr. J. Lee. Yeah, we'll change it. Thanks, Mayor.
The goal here is to not write these resolutions on the fly in open meetings. The premise here is that we're giving people an opportunity to see it, that when we come back on the special meeting, which we have to do simply because of the timing of the conference being earlier, we would usually would have had an LPC in front of that everybody's seen it and you're ready to vote. And so that's the goal here of this process. Mayor Silvestrini can remember we used to have some surprises that hit us in the business meeting when people hadn't really seen things. The goal here is not to stifle debate, but to see if we can come up with a product that is finished so the vote's up or down on the merits.
Okay, thank you all for that. Moving right along. We're going to talk about everybody's favorite topics, interim and UEOC. We know this is why you're really here. So we have shown this before, but just want to remind everybody that within the UEOC, the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission, there are groups, there are subgroups, and then whatever is lower than a subgroup, there are those two. There are a lot of groups on this one, and we have representation on all of the ones that we really care about. There are some that we have been less involved with. That's because there are things going on that we aren't as worried about. But I do want to thank those of you who have been participating in these throughout the summer. We know there's been a lot of these UEOC meetings, but we have had good city representation, not just from the staff, but from electeds, city managers, city attorneys who've been working on this. So thank you all for your efforts and your help here. To give you an idea of the timeline that is coming up for the UEOC. The UEOC meets on August 30th, so about a week before our conference, to consider early action items. That is right in the way there. That will impact the budget in some way. So we may see, again, I said may, they said shall, but I'm going with the may see some solid proposals come out in August that will give us a better idea where some of these are going. The Commission on Housing Affordability, the CHA, will meet to finalize their legislative proposals on September 5th. So we will have some updates certainly for that at the conference, our annual conference again, the 6th or the 8th. If you have not yet registered, do so now. September 27th, UEOC meets to consider regular items. So these are again legislative items, but ones that will not impact the budget necessarily as much, or they could, because none of this is set in stone. And then finally, on October 26th, the goal is for the UEOC to meet to consider all the final items for interim. And then those bills would then be hopefully considered in either, well, at that point, really the November interim meeting is the only one left. So we hope to see some clarity coming out of the UEOC in a lot of those subgroups and even larger groups. There's still a lot of work going on to help crystallize some ideas there. But we do have some issues. Cam, I'm going to have you jump up here to talk about growth and transportation. But we do have some issues that have started coming to the forefront, and we want to get your take on some of them, and in some cases just give you updates about where things are going. So Cam, I'll give it to you for growth and transportation.
Perfect. Thank you, Justin, and thank you everybody for being here. It's hard to believe that summer vacation is almost over, because in a way it never felt like summer vacation started because of all the meetings we've been having at the Capitol through the UEOC and otherwise. A couple of things I just want to emphasize. Number one, before we jump into this, just to put a ribbon on top on the resolutions process, I've had a couple of people who grabbed me in the back and were showing me the resolution and said, well, I'd like to propose a change to this language or this language. Send all of that, email all of that to Justin. We'll be aggregating all of it and then bringing back the final resolution in form for your consideration in a couple of weeks. So make sure you follow up that way. The second thing related to the UEOC is we initially thought that at this LPC, we would actually have proposals for you to vote on in anticipation of that August 30th meeting. That's not really the case. There is still a lot of uncertainty about the exact policy proposals that the UEOC is going to prioritize. Mayor Don Ramsey, the league representative on the UEOC, she'll have to cast a vote on August 30th about whatever ultimately gets funneled there, and we'll be coordinating closely with her. There have been subgroups on top of subgroups on top of subgroups. So we've been trying to stay on top of all these subgroups to make sure we know which ideas are coming up in which areas, which ones are consistent with longstanding league policy or survey results, so that we in turn can figure out how to set those positions. For example, in the growth and transportation space, There have been, at this point, Andrew, I think we had 3 formal subgroups, and then there were multiple subgroups under those subgroups. So all total, close to 10 different subgroups under the banner of growth and transportation. We've summarized the key topics here on this slide that will impact cities in some form or fashion if they proceed. So first, in anything in italics are items that we brought forward to the UEOC based on feedback from you, the membership, throughout the spring and interim. You'll see in italics includes the transportation utility fee, tolling and user fees in high visitation areas, state infrastructure bank, transit innovation grants, open space / parks investment tools. This came out of the Rapid Growth Caucus back at the spring conference about having some sort of tool to help, some sort of state tool to help incentivize the dedication of parks and open space in rapidly growing areas. Also could be a potential tool in redeveloping areas. The other topics that are not italics have come up in these different spaces. So we're going to ask you a Slido question in a moment about collection of restaurant sales taxes on prepared food and non-restaurant. So I'll come back to that one. Under the state and local policy alignment, you'll see parking. One thing that's been interesting is that if there's one topic that has come up the most in the most subgroups, it's been the topic of parking policy. Everything from parking within residential areas and minimum lot sizes and minimum house sizes and garage sizes to parking in commercial areas. At one point, there was discussion about state preemption to allow housing in underutilized parking lots. A lot of that conversation has pivoted away from preemption toward more of potentially state revenue that could help bridge the gap to develop parking structures in older commercial areas to facilitate redevelopment of housing's a piece of it. But everything is still at a pretty high level right now. With respect to the transportation utility fee, this morning the League Board of Directors met and adopted some key principles to guide our advocacy there. The LPC also has had a infrastructure subgroup, and one of the topics that that subgroup has looked at has been the future of the transportation utility fee. The first deliberation between the stakeholders will take place this week, though 2 different legislative interim committees have heard presentations about the transportation interim committee or transportation utility fee this summer. So with that, join Slido. We're going to ask some questions via Slido again, just to get general feedback. There's nothing official for you to vote on, but the Slido feedback has been really helpful for us in the last few meetings so that we can go into some of these deliberations with a nice snapshot of where the membership is at. I wish I actually was taking a picture of everybody taking pictures of the screen, because it's a pretty funny sight from up here. Yeah. Okay. Those of you online, hopefully you're all there also. Okay. So this is the easy question. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Wow. Okay. Thank you, Seth. Seth, I appreciate people taking it seriously. Okay. Well, I would say something snippy about that corner too, Seth, but there are enough BYU fans there, and I feel an immense debt of gratitude to BYU fans for voting to let Utah into the Big 12, that right now they can be a snippy if they want. Okay. Okay, what city do you represent? We don't track it by individual person, but it is helpful. We do break it down by different classifications of cities when there are divided votes. So Carson, I assume I can just keep advancing. You're seeing the results? Did that question show up? I'm seeing quick present. While Carson pulls that up, I mentioned this in Friday Facts, but I was actually out of cell phone coverage for a good chunk of the Friday that the Pac-12 fell apart. So we started that morning, Utah was in the Pac-12. Go in and out of cell phone coverage, Pac-12 falls apart, and my wife could sense my anxiousness as I was driving in and out of coverage, asking her every time we got any sort of signal to check to see if Utah had a resting place yet. So it was a very stressful vacation day. Perfect. Thank you, Carson. Or just know they came from you, Summer, or Amy, was that you? Okay.
Well, no, it has something.
Oh, well, there you go. Yes, then that I would know. Okay, we'll let a few more of these get in so that everybody's in. Just a few more seconds, make sure everybody's in. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this is the issue I had on the slide that has come up in one of the UEOC groups. We want to get a sense of the general support within our membership as this conversation continues. Let me explain this before you fill it out. So think of it this way: if you go into Wendy's right now and you buy a junior bacon cheeseburger, like I did all the time in college, that junior bacon cheeseburger, you're paying sales tax, you're paying the restaurant tax. If you go into a Wendy's that is part of a convenience store, that Wendy's may or may not be collecting or remitting the sales tax and the other related taxes because it's in a convenience store. Likewise, if you go into just a convenience store, say Wendy's isn't there, but it has prepared sandwiches, you may or may not be paying sales tax or tourism taxes on those prepared sandwiches. So the issue that's arisen in the UEOC has been a question of tax equity between, say, a convenience store that maybe isn't collecting and remitting the sales taxes, including our sales taxes, for prepared food, like a restaurant is. So the Restaurant Association has brought this up, and it's come up in the growth and transportation subgroup as a way to help provide a revenue stream, particularly for those off the Wasatch Front who will have a lot of prepared food in non-traditional settings. Okay. So a little bird from the back asked, have the restaurants agreed to this? Oh, the original position, yes. Yeah, the original position, the restaurants agreed to it. So this is why the restaurants have brought forward, bring it up as a tax equity issue. And particularly in rural Utah, we think this could be an important way to again capture some of the users and the tourists that are coming through those communities.
Yeah, this didn't happen by accident.
So even though you have a big voice, Roger, we do need a mic. So Liam.
A little bit of background on this. This situation didn't occur because of an oversight or accident. When the Delta Center was built years ago, part of it was, and one of the issues, how to pay for the salt house expansion, a number of other things. That's part of the restaurant tax. And frankly, what qualified didn't qualify was a mess.
Gotcha.
How do you handle movie theaters? How do you do stuff? Part of this I helped make some decisions on at 3 o'clock in the morning in Anchorage, Alaska. Call, but I just want you to know it's a hard issue. It doesn't surprise me changes have been made. There needs to be uniformity on it. I just want you to know this wasn't a case of somebody was cheating. It's just really an odd duck.
Perfect. Thank you for that background, Roger. Carson, for people online, is summarizing what Roger said. This is the mic issues. So if you have any follow-up questions online, just put them in there and Carson can address those. Part of the reason we're asking this question is there's a lot of appetite, pun intended, at the Capitol to look at sales tax on food and the remaining state portion of the sales tax on food. We're always concerned about any additional efforts by the state in the sales tax on food arena could impact our 1%, because our 1% is still imposed on food, whereas the state imposes a lower rate and all the other sales taxes are not imposed on food. So anyway, this is good feedback for us as these conversations continue. Let me head then to the next one. Stop sharing now, Carson.
Or go back.
Just get to the next slide. From Slido?
Yeah, you're on the right on the page.
We'll just go back to this then. All right, so Carson's saving the day again. One quick note related to the transportation utility fee. Okay, there we go. One final note on the transportation utility fee. is I mentioned that the board adopted some general principles. For those of you on the subgroup, we'll circulate those principles later today. They're consistent with what we've been discussing as a subgroup. Subgroup has been really into the details. What the board adopted today was the overarching policy principles. And again, our deliberations get underway in earnest this week. Carson.
We have two questions online. The first is, would the sales tax expansion apply to commercially prepared foods and food trucks?
Roger.
Yeah, it would.
Oh, hold on, Mike.
Questions.
Oh, go ahead. I'll just repeat it then.
I said, those are some of the questions that have to be answered.
Yeah, so Roger's saying those are some of the questions that have to be answered. So right now we're at the phase of several groups have brought this up as a problem to be solved. We wanted to know if our members shared the feeling that this should be a problem that we should look at to solve as part of the larger conversations around tax policy. And then the second one, oh yeah, Gil, same thing, that it's that definition is going to be the critical piece. Okay, Justin, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. All right, moving on to talk about water and natural resources. So this is a sampling of things that we've heard this year. And you'll notice I put UEOC at the bottom because the UEOC has not had a lot of water issues yet that probably are going to impact us. A lot of it is discussion around infrastructure funding, long-term planning, which are all good things and we care about, but aren't bills that may impact us as much. But there are a few out there. Now, again, we're not taking positions on these. Most of these, well, actually, none of these bills are really out there in any kind of form that we can discuss yet. We are sharing a draft of a couple of these. We've gotten permission to share it for a very small group. But for those of you who are working with us in our water working group, there's going to be plenty to discuss coming up here. But just a preview of some of the things that are out there. One, there's some discussion around riparian corridor preservation. I don't think this part's secret. Representative Benyon is looking at running some legislation around this and some adjustments to the general plan long term that may look at this one. Another one is water-wise landscaping for new development. We saw a bill that looked like this last year that just basically said all new development, whether commercial or residential, would need to have some amount of water-wise landscaping. We just know this one is out there. We haven't seen a bill actually on it yet, but a little bird has told me that this one is coming. A ban on watering during the shoulder season being something to the effect of October 1st through April 15th. But we expect to see some kind of legislation that would put a ban on watering during the shoulder season. Some of these may be limited only to the Great Salt Lake Basin. Some of them may be further ranging. And then there is definitely a discussion around water sizing standards. Again, not looking for any feedback, but just putting these on your radar for right now. If you are on the water working group, we're going to have some work to do coming up in the next couple of months as we get more specifics around this. But just know that there are water bills that are coming. There are issues that are out there, and we'll be bringing you back some specifics as we get going. So just some preview. Cam, I think we're going to jump right back to housing and land use. So have you jump back up here.
As I mentioned, we don't have anything for you to vote on yet, but there are a lot of moving pieces in the housing land use space that we just want to make sure are on your radar. The good news is, for a lot of these topics, we've actually asked Slido questions at LPC earlier this summer. So we don't need to ask the group again how you feel about third-party building inspections, for example. But the topics are still out there. So you have the Commission on Housing Affordability and the Land Use Task Force. They overlap. The Land Use Task Force is also looking at land use technical items. The Commission on Housing Affordability looking just at policy, both land use policy and otherwise. What we've highlighted in yellow are first the items in italics are the ones that we brought forward. So removing state barriers to condominium development, and then in the Land Use Task Force, that plus making some technical fixes to what passed last year and a couple other bills. In other words, we haven't proposed anything large or new. It's mainly been making sure what has passed has time to be implemented and works as anticipated. The condo development, that gets to one of the key principles that we have as an organization, which is owner occupancy, that anything we're talking about in this space needs to result in an outcome of more affordability, more owner occupancy, in sustainable infrastructure, or improved quality of life. What's highlighted here are the areas where we think the dialogue may go in a way that could result in consensus. So let me take a second and just set the stage for the state framework for modular offsite housing construction. This is something that has come up with more and more regularity over the last few weeks. And again, we don't have a proposal for you to look at here. The first real in-depth conversation about this just happened last week, but the rumblings have been occurring elsewhere. And the state of Idaho and other places around the country have been looking into different types of state standardized approaches to the regulation of off-site construction, modular construction for housing. We've asked Jared Tingey, our new legal director, to do some research into what's happening in these other states. The Ivory Institute at the University of Utah that focuses on innovations in housing has also been looking at the different regulatory cultures around the country. We expect them to bring forward some different recommendations. Salt Lake City, I know, has been looking into this with regards to the building code. So we think dialogue is going to start funneling toward something in the modular offsite housing construction space. We just don't know exactly what that looks like right now. That said, we want to make sure it's on your radar so that if there's anybody who had any thoughts or questions or ideas or experience in this space, could notify us now as that conversation gets going. So I'll pause there, see if anybody in the room or online has any specific thoughts on the modular piece or any experience or anything that they want to bring up on this topic. Yeah, I've got a question in the back.
No, statement.
Oh, statement in the back. A declaration.
Yeah, no, we've actually, as far as like modular homes or mobile homes, that's not what I'm suggesting. We've actually been working with Oakwood Homes, who has been pre-stacking all of their panels off-site for homes. And so it's modular in that way, in that they roll up with a truck, they unload all of the walls of the house, and then in about 7 days have the house framed and dried in. And so we've seen that as a fast way that they're building homes, which is actually it's quite intriguing. They lay out the walls and things in a factory, I think it's out in Tooele or something like that, and then ship it all in, and then they're craning together a house, virtually just in a couple of days. It's intriguing. They claim that it's very economical. I'm less concerned about something like that than I am, enforcing something where, and I realize there's, to some extent, we already have to deal with, true mobile home product, but for a city that has, 60% unbuilt, if the state's going down this road, we're really scared of what kind of product that's going to lead to and what that's going to result in, especially for communities. So please be very cautious that there are percentages and other things that are in place that just doesn't mean that we have to accept thousands of acres of modular homes.
Well, thank you for that perspective. And I didn't ask Mark to speak up, but I'm glad you did, because the example you gave, and Santa Quinn and Norm has posted in the chat room that they've had a similar example. That is exactly what we're referencing about offsite construction, where it's essentially put together somewhere, it's manufactured somewhere else and then brought on site and installed on site. It's not your traditional mobile home of yesteryear. So again, don't know where this is going to end up, but there's a lot of interest in the industry in approaching this. They're making the argument that it would save the cost on their end, which could result in reduced prices. That's why we expect there to be a lot more momentum in this space, even though it's just now starting. Carson, go ahead.
Lynn had a question about...
Yep, I saw that. Okay. So I'll come back to that one in just a sec. Okay, perfect. So Carson, I see you responded to a couple folks there. So then in the chat room, any chance to broaden the first-time homebuyer assistance program to apply to any new home, not just to newly constructed homes? This has come up with several of our more established cities that don't have much greenfield. The answer right now is no. We have brought it up at multiple meetings and there's not much appetite for it, in part because the demand for that program, which is only a month old, is already through the roof. And if President Adams were here, he would say part of the rationale to creating that first-time homebuyer program was to be an incentive for new production and new development. So we've brought this up. We've also brought up the idea of having a little more nuance. So having a target for townhomes and condos that's a different target than a detached single-family home. Right now, they're all treated as the same. There is a little interest in possibly doing that. So stay tuned on that one, Lynn, because you're speaking for several people in several cities who brought that issue up. So Norm, you mentioned D.R. Horton's done similar things as in Saratoga. By quick show of hands in the room, how many of you have seen the offsite construction that Mark described? How many of you have seen something like that in your cities recently? Okay, kind of half and half in Harriman, Salt Lake.
Not in Harriman, but another.
Oh, no. Okay, okay.
Very good.
Okay, perfect. So in Colorado or other? Oregon, okay. That's helpful because we're trying to get a sense around the country. The example that keeps coming up is that Idaho passed a statewide code, and there are some factories that have set up shop in Boise that are doing a lot of the manufacturing and then shipping the housing materials to California because it's more cost effective for the builders to do it that way than to build on site in California. But it's good to know that there's something in Oregon we can follow that way. Online, if you've seen it, similar to what Santa Clara and Saratoga have referenced, please put it up. I've got Councilmember Shields from Harriman. Yeah, and this is a good point about the difference between manufactured homes and mobile homes, about the permanent foundation or not. And so when we're talking about modular offsite housing construction, thus far the dialogue has been around those with permanent foundations. Okay, you don't need to see two of me. I guess you're going to see two of me. The other topics you can see that are up here that have come up still are not ready for a vote. And most of them don't even have proposals drafted yet. They're just the concepts that have been coming up in the different meetings. Back in the spring, the LPC created a land use subgroup. We've met a couple of times this summer where we've been asking for specific feedback to inform our negotiators, and those meetings have been really productive. So if you want to be a participant either there or in that transportation subgroup, let us know and we can add you to those lists. But the Land Use Task Force has another meeting scheduled at the end of August. So we'll be asking for more feedback from that subgroup as we get closer to that August meeting. Any other questions in the land use or housing spaces? Okay, Carson, I see this one from Melinda. I'll just do this one out loud because I think it's important. Melinda from Kaysville asked if there's an update on the moderate income housing subsequent reporting is going so far. So a couple of things here for people to know. First, thank you to all the cities for meeting the expedited August 1st deadline. So the deadline moved up from last year. We know that that was a pain. It was difficult, but Carson, I'm looking at you to check my memory on this, but all but 2 cities met that August 1st deadline, right? Everybody. Okay, so those 2 got it in. Okay, so all 83 cities that had to comply met that initial deadline. So that's huge. Thank you for the work that your cities did to meet that deadline. DWS is now going through the process of evaluating compliance. If you do receive a letter of non-compliance, let us know. And last year, we were able to negotiate in the cure provision, which allows you to appeal that determination. So you have a period to cure, or you can go to the appeals board. It's a 3-member appeals board. The league has one of the 3 members of that appeals body. Our board this morning approved Rob Wall, who's a retired city attorney with decades of experience. We nominated and approved him to represent cities on that appeals board. So he'll be there likely just for this first year because he and his wife have some retirement plans, but they're still a few months out, and we wanted to take advantage of his expertise in this space for the first year of that appeals board. So thank you to the work you've done thus far. If you do get a letter of non-compliance, we'd like to know, and then recognize there are now 2 ways. You can either cure on your own, or you can go to that appeals board. The hope is as we get close to the session in January and the timing comes together, that we'll have a great story to tell the legislature of how cities are doing our part, which then reinforces the narrative that we don't need additional heavy duty legislation in this space. Amy.
So one of the things that was included in this year's report that we struggled to report was the number of accessory dwelling units in our community. And I didn't know if others had strategies or ways they were gathering that data or information, because we only have 2 that are licensed in the city. And so our numbers look low, but I'm sure they're higher in reality.
I can give you the genesis of why that provision was added, but your question was more for membership in general of advice on how to handle that piece.
So I thought there was a 2-part question, and I'm sorry, I reviewed it, I didn't do it. But I thought one question is IADU housing that was available potentially, and then how many was actually done? And they were looking, we interpreted that as 2 separate numbers. One being, okay, of the 25% of your community that you didn't exempt, how many other homes theoretically could have an IADU? And then how many have actually gotten licensed? And so our whopping number of license was 11, but the number of units was actually quite large. And so I think that's the distinction that we really want to play off of from our perspective is that not many people are licensed. So we probably need some more teeth on that side if they're going to be doing that, but also, you know, we need to show the total number of what we're being asked to provide. And yes, I think this information all gets used against us in future legislative sessions.
Or gets used for us, Mark. I really do think the data will help set us free, and Carson's been the league staff are on point with the data subcommittee at the CHAWS. They're building out the database. And when we get to the data in a moment on the agenda, we've been using the data collection that you provided to us last year to really pivot a lot of the debate that's been happening at the Capitol. Okay. So one idea that came up last week in the land use task force that we wanted just to take a quick smell test with this group on was if there was a document that right now the shorthand has been rights and responsibilities of applicants, powers and duties of local land use authorities, having that information available essentially at the counter at all land use authorities around the state, both to help property owners know what they can and can't do and to explain the powers and duties of cities. So this is one that oh, go ahead, Carson.
I was just going to clarify, be prepared by the property rights office. It's not required on the order.
Yeah. So Carson was just pointing out this would be prepared by the property rights ombudsman with feedback from the league, from developers, and everybody in between to try to provide that frontline information. Okay. Yep, that's a good snapshot. And this is, I think, an example of where not everything needs to be solved with a bill. There are things that we can do collaboratively, short of legislation, to improve the overall land use climate. Go ahead, Mayor Silvestrini.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say about that, we had a little bit of a discussion about this, but I have some reservations about requiring municipalities to explain rights and responsibilities to the extent that we're being asked to be comprehensive about somebody's rights or even give legal advice. I think that whatever we do there, the informational stuff should be fine, but being required to advise applicants about their rights is broad.
No, that's an excellent point, and we're in the middle of that battle with development agreement language too. So thank you for that point. Okay. Justin, I'll turn it back to you for a variety of hats here. Oh, the last thing I'll note, the CHA, Justin went through the calendar earlier. So the CHA policy group will be meeting the first week the full CHA will meet the first week in September. And the CHA policy group will be meeting this week and again later this month. So those of you who are on the land use subgroup, just know we'll likely be trying to get together one more time before convention or during convention to talk about what the pieces are, because at some point they'll need something to present. Again, we've been pushing on the condominium piece, but I think there'll be other pieces to this puzzle.
All right, let's shift gears a little bit. We're going to talk about elections. So, quick story. Long ago, when I was a deputy director in the lieutenant governor's office over elections, I actually came to LPC. I had no idea what the meeting was, but I at one point stood at this podium and asked the question, "How does everybody feel?" And I don't know who was here at that point. It was like 2014, 2015. But the idea went away at that point. The idea was not ripe, and there were some counties that just did not have the confidence of their local officials to run all the elections. But the idea has been resurrected. The idea has come back and was discussed at our interim meeting a week ago in GovOps. So some questions for you all, and we're going to ask these by Slido, but they're all up here so you can think about them in advance. And a little bit of history. So if you roll all the way back to 2010, I know that's a ways back for some of you, but in 2010, pretty much everybody ran their elections the same way. Most elections, most voting was done in person at a polling location on a touch screen. Any voter could request a by-mail ballot, but we only had quarter, maybe less, of voters who were doing it at that point. There was 2 weeks of early voting, but for the majority of voters, voting was happening on election day. Over the course of 2010 to 2020, elections in Utah underwent all kinds of changes. And during that time, different counties, different cities were doing all kinds of different things with early voting, with vote by mail, with election day registration, with a variety of things. We've actually come back to a place now where it looks completely different than it did in 2010, but all counties are basically running their elections the same way again. Now it's just most people are voting by mail, with some early voting and a little bit of voting on election day. Now, I know a lot of you already contract with your counties to run your election during that transition from 2010 to 2020, and a lot of it had to do with the transition to vote by mail, but more and more cities and towns started just contracting with their counties to run their elections anyway. Now, we hit this year when we had our special congressional election coming up, that threw our election calendar out of whack, and also due to the legislation and the proclamation that came out, counties are running all elections this year. So with all those, the questions I want you to get your input on Slido is, first, were you going to contract with your county to run your election 2023 before the state mandated it? I know you're all doing it now because you have to, but were you going to do it even if the state had not mandated it? And don't worry, there will be Slidos on these. You can answer. What year did you start contracting with your county to run your elections, if they're doing so? How comfortable are you with the law requiring counties to run elections? And then what issues would need to be resolved to make you more comfortable? So we're going to jump to those. So one, go to your Slido again. If you need to get the code, it's there on the side. But did you plan on contracting with your county to run your election in 2023 before the state mandated it? I'm going to give a few more seconds to answer this one. And if anyone did not plan on, I'd be really interested to hear what reasons, not that I'm judging, that sounded like I'm judging, like, why did you do it? But I'd be really curious why you want to run your own elections instead of contract with the county, if anybody wants to share that. Okay, next question. What year did you begin contracting with your county to run your elections? Since 91% of you said you were already going to. Curious when that started for everybody. And if you don't know, you can give me your best guess. All the way back in 2011, right? Long time ago. Always? Not quite always. Actually, know when you did. No, I just happened to have been around when it transitioned over. Not sure, 1950s, maybe.
No.
Always. A while, okay. These are solid data points. I'm excited to aggregate these. My fault for asking. No, this is okay. Jumping to the next one. And this is the big policy question we have. How comfortable are you with a proposed law requiring counties to run all elections? And happy to take comment on this one. 91% of you are already contracting with your counties to run your elections. But my guess is very comfortable it's not going to be at 91%. So happy to take any thoughts or comments as to why you're happy to contract with your county, but don't want it mandated.
Because if they start to be corrupt or whatever, we now could pull it back. I'm just asking the question.
Yeah. Here, Liam's going to give you the mic.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good.
And I'm just speaking, I mean, I'm not sure how I answer, but just, yeah, we're fine. Just what if the county started to do a terrible job and was corrupt or whatever? Now we can pull it back and do it ourselves. Once you mandate it by law, we just lost control forever. So I'm guessing that's why we have it. It's very flexible.
Okay.
That's my thoughts.
Your thoughts? Yeah. So Mayor Silvestrini, and then back to Mark.
So we never had the actual issue, but we did have a discussion when the ranked choice voting pilot first came out with our county clerk in Salt Lake County expressing reservations about whether they were going to be willing to run that kind of an election. At one point, they even suggested that we go and talk to the Utah County clerk about that. So ultimately that never materialized, but that could be an issue, I suppose, if there are different methods of voting are permissible and a county clerk decides they don't want to do one of them because of software expenses or whatever reason.
Yeah, so ranked choice voting is, yeah, certainly something there. I will note there is a provision in the law that allows a city to contract with a county that is not their county to run a ranked choice voting election. So Utah County, in fact, helped Moab run a ranked choice voting election, which is super weird to me, but that is what the law says. Mark.
So I agree with the mayor. I think it's incompetency, not corruption, is probably the bigger issue. But I think the fundamental principle for us is we don't want to lose control because my council on the opposite end of the spectrum, we don't want ranked choice voting. And if the county's running it, if they're controlling it, if they can mandate it, then our council is going to be very much opposed to anything where they don't have the ability to choose their own destiny as it relates to those decisions. So mandated. Now, the question that you didn't show yet is who's paying for it, because that could certainly sway some of us different directions.
Well, and that's a good segue into this final question. What issues would need to be resolved to make you more comfortable with counties running all elections? And maybe you aren't comfortable, but yes, funding is one that is a big deal to me. It's one that has to be figured out. Right now, the law says that a city, and this is true before any laws change, if you contract with the county, you obviously are paying for your own election. You're just paying the county to run that. So the mechanism and the language there has to be just right to make sure that counties aren't charging you more than they should be for the actual cost of an election. Mark, you can't say that about yourself. That's weird.
Well, no, my state.
Now, again, there is not a bill file open on this one. This was brought up in interim committee last week. They asked for a bill file to be opened, but one was not open yet. There are, it was great, and I'm going to record it and I'm going to play it back when certain legislators said, we think that local control is important and the city should be able to do what they want to. I'm going to record that and send it to him in a text when he says the opposite on a different bill. But there were legislators who were concerned about having a mandate on this one as well. So we'll see where it goes, but this feedback is very helpful. Any final thoughts on this one? Because we have a bunch more to cover. So Cam, we're going to hit state audits really quick if you want to give an update on what you've heard recently. And then Molly or Mayor Silvestrini, if you want to give any quick updates on where the homeless discussions are, particularly the process, I think, that went down in Salt Lake recently. And Carson will get to research right after that.
Couple quick things to put on your radar on state audits. If anything, this is the radar meeting, right? Because We're trying to get general direction from you on different topics and make sure you're aware of what's out there. So first, there is a state audit underway through the Legislative Auditor's Office around local ordinances and housing affordability and the nexus thereof. It's underway. We've had a couple of preliminary meetings with their staff. That is separate from the housing affordability review of housing regulations that Envision Utah is doing. That is funded by state dollars. Envision Utah's report will be coming out in September. And Envision Utah has now done 2 presentations to the league board, including this morning, about where they're at in their analysis. So separate from the Envision Utah piece is the legislative fiscal audit. Now, as a just quick backstory, the way legislators can start these audits through the fiscal or through the legislative fiscal auditor's office, really through simple requests, either through leadership or otherwise. So there are a lot of audits out there. We track them on the state's website, but just know that's one that the topic is of concern, but we don't know where it's going to end up. The second audit to be aware of, we saw a embargoed first draft last week, is actually, I think, going to be very helpful to cities. And it's, again, coming from the Legislative Auditor's Office, and that is around the use of Class B and C funds by local government. And one of the key takeaways from what we've seen thus far and what we had been telling them is that Class B and C revenue does not keep up with the actual transportation demands at the city and county level. And that is likely going to be one of the main takeaways from that audit. So when going back to the transportation utility fee conversation, we think that audit would actually be very helpful as we have the discussion around transportation utility fees. That's the Legislative Auditor's Office, not to be confused with Auditor John Dougal, the Utah State Auditor. And the state auditor recently completed his analysis about development fees and created a dashboard on his website around development fees, which has drawn a lot of consternation, and justifiably so, from local governments because of the incomplete nature of that dashboard and how certain fees were categorized. So we've been trying to gather some information from cities about that to follow up with Auditor Dougal on that dashboard. That data was all collected through your annual audit process, as opposed to additional outreach from his office. Likewise, Auditor Dougal just last week unveiled a property tax database, and it's a property tax dashboard. He presented it to the Revenue Tax Committee last week to help inform the public about the changes in property valuations over the last few years for every parcel of property in participating counties. Not every county participated with them. I believe the number is 19 of the 29 counties. We just know that's another dashboard that the auditor's office has created that's out there. Any questions about any of those moving pieces in the audit space? I always get the exciting ones. Why am I talking about audits? Okay. With that, I'm going to step aside and let Molly and Mercer Stream talk about homelessness.
So as most of you know, House Bill 404 passed the session last year, and that set some, I guess, more complicated requirements for cities and counties of the first class, that county of the first class, to formulate a winter overflow plan earlier in the year than past years. And the other thing that it did for counties of the second class, so next year, there are Davis and Utah counties, so at least they're going to have to come up with some kind of a plan to address the issue. I'm happy to report that the mayors in Salt Lake County were able to get together, meet early, come up with a plan. I specifically want to thank the city of Sandy because they stepped up in a big way to create a facility for a medically vulnerable population. And also West Valley City, which likewise is going to be operating a 24/7 facility for unsheltered. And those things are heavy lifts because, in spite of the fact that But I'm convinced, based upon my own experience, that these facilities can be run in a way that's not as problematic as others. They still need a lot of public opposition and are tough. So it's courageous local leaders that are doing that. So we followed our plan. We had to expand it over last year because the point in time count showed that we needed about 600 overflow beds this winter, plus about another 200 beds for what's a cold blue situation, which is where temperatures are forecast to be at or below 15 degrees Fahrenheit. So we were able to meet those requirements and submitted our plan to the state, and it's been approved. One of the things that we still need to work on, however, is that there isn't funding for this type of an operation. And, you know, there are a few cities that may have resources to deal with this issue in a way that some of us don't. But by and large, you know, we're going to need to remind the legislature that municipalities are not generally in the business of providing social services. And this is not something we've ever budgeted for, and we don't have the money for it. Okay, I mean, it's really difficult. So we need some more state help on that. Mayor Zulkansky.
I'll give an update on the MVP project in Sandy. It's for interim housing facility. So it's to bridge the gap between people who are living in the day shelters, the homeless resource centers, the walk-up shelters. Those with medically complex conditions would come to the housing in Sandy, but it would be stabilized. It would be a matter of a time period for up to 12 or even 24 months, the way the application has been presented to the city, with the ultimate goal of then establishing them in permanent housing. So it's that unmet need along the continuum of care, and it's very well suited to the location in Sandy at the former Econo Lodge Hotel close to the freeway, to the board in home, in care, in resident services. So something similar to an assisted living facility. Anyway, I just want, hold the applause, because we just got the application last week, and so we're just beginning. We're beginning our public process. Our neighborhood meeting is a week from Wednesday, and then it will go to the planning commission and then to the city council. So watch it carefully. And I think as this item has come into the public discussion, there is growing support. So I'm hopeful that it's going to be approved, but watch it carefully. And if you have any suggestions on issues, how they're presented to the public, or reaction from the community, I'm keeping a very close eye or watching this every step of the way and bringing together important stakeholders who are going to be adjacent to the facility, and basically educate our residents on what is to be expected and what we anticipate the public impact will be. So it's not a done deal by any stretch. There's a process that's involved, but we are underway, and it's encouraging.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that's all I've got, Cam.
Okay, we have a couple more items to hit, so hang with us. We should be done here in about 7 minutes, I would guess. These are other items that have come up during interim. This is just a fraction of the overall list. Justin's going to give you the bad news in a little bit about the overall list, but these were just items that came up last week at legislative interim. We have one that we told the bill sponsor, Representative Paul Cutler, that we would get feedback on, and as some of you know, he's a former mayor of Centerville, and it is about use of RAP tax. Now, last year there was a bill that also came from Davis County cities that the league supported that didn't get across the finish line, but we're expecting it to come back to provide more flexibility in the timing of voter approval of RAP taxes. What Representative Cutler is looking at doing, we told him we would get a quick snapshot from the members about whether cities could spend RAP tax outside of municipal boundaries. I'm going to use the Davis County example because that's what's front of mind for him, but we're also trying to get a sense of, is this something that is a league-wide issue, or is this really unique for Davis County? So in Davis County, you have a South Davis Rec Center pool that's in Bountiful City, and you have the Centerpoint Theater that is in Centerville City. So what Representative Cutler is looking at is could a city in Davis County that has imposed a city wrap tax take those dollars? So Ken, I'm just gonna pick on you because I see you back there. Could North Salt Lake take some of their city, hold on. I was about to pick on North Salt Lake, but then Bountiful raised your hand. Isn't that always the case, right? I can't even finish a conversation with North Salt Lake. Go ahead, Bountiful.
Yeah, I believe under state law, if a city has an interlocal agreement with that other city, then you can spend those wrap tax dollars in other cities. So for instance, Bountiful has a interlocal agreement with the city of Centerville that we can use our wrap tax dollars for the theater that is in Centerville that serves kind of all of the South Davis community. So is he asking for something outside of what already exists?
Yes.
You can do it without the interlocal agreement?
Yep, you got it.
Recreation, arts.
It's the ZAP in Salt Lake County, wrap everywhere else.
Bear in mind, one of the limitations is it has to go on the ballot specifying what you're going to spend it for.
Yeah.
So in effect, at that point, you're locked into whatever you did for the period of the ZAP tax. Centerville, West Bountiful, and Bountiful built the Centerpoint Theater because that's what they put it on the ballot for and designated it. When that 10 years ran out, Bountiful chose to use this money for something else, and you can. But it isn't a general fund purpose revenue when you start out. You have to say what you're doing it for.
Excellent points. So again, recognizing that South Davis County has a unique experience there, what we were just trying to get from a policy perspective as we try to prioritize our priorities is how you feel about it. In my fact pattern, if North Salt Lake imposes the wrap tax, the voters approve it, but the money isn't actually spent in North Salt Lake boundaries, but is spent regionally, whether it's for Centerpoint, the South Davis Rec Center, whatever the case may be. Okay, so interesting feedback there. And then, so I think is it fair to say the uncertain is because you want to see more details before you weigh in? I see enough head nods there that I'm going to assume that's the case. Okay, so then this is us trying to get a sense of, is this something that is a broad policy desire generally? Is this something that your city would choose to spend wrap tax outside of your boundaries for regional facilities or other things? Because what's helpful is this may just be a very unique issue in South Davis County as opposed to something broader. Okay. That is helpful feedback. We've got a meeting scheduled with him later this month, so that's very helpful. And with that, thank you for everybody being here. I'm going to turn back over to Justin and Carson to wrap up the data asks. And this is where we need your help so we can continue trying to define the narrative and complete the narrative at the Capitol. So last thing is that the LPC will have that resolutions meeting before the annual convention. And then during the annual convention, September 6th through 8th, we'll be talking about whatever issues of these are ripe. And then we'll have LPC later in the month of September. So Justin, Carson, take it away.
Yeah, real quick. I think the question that some of us have is if it was passed by the citizens in the enabling language for the wrap tax, I don't think we care. Yeah. But I think if it's a blanket, you can take any wrap tax anywhere and spend it anyhow. I think a lot of us would be very opposed to that.
Sure.
So I guess to your question, if it's written into your taxing structure, then it's written in, and I don't know that we have a problem. But if it's not, we don't want to have to, create carve-outs for anything like that.
Yep, excellent nuance there. Great. Justin.
All right. I will make one funny tie in there. If anyone wants to go to Centerpoint Theater, I'm the fight choreographer for Jekyll and Hyde that will be playing here next month. So if you want to go see a very different side of my work, go see that. So one quick quiz. I'm going to ask you all, you can just throw this out or write it down and feel really smart with your neighbor. How many bill files do you think are open at this point? And I'm going to give you a reference point. Last year in October, so at the annual convention last year, I got up and reported that there were 636 bill files open on October 7th of last year. So you can just write it down or turn to your neighbor and tell them how many you think. How many bill files do you think are open as of this morning? Senator Harper has put in quite a few. He would be in the top 3 in the Senate, yes. All right. Now, oh, maybe it'll come up. Did I lose it? There it is. There are 770 bill requests in. As of this morning, that is a 21% increase over last year, and that is 2 months earlier than the last time I looked at that number. Senate has 234, the House has 536. Now, I will note that we do have a lot of freshman legislators that were not putting in bill requests at this time last year, but that is a lot. Yes, Senator Harper has put in his bill requests. He was in the top 3. In the Senate, we had, I think, 28, 26, and 25, so the top 3 individual requesters. There is one representative who has 45 bill requests out there. Mike Winder's not there to go for a big number anymore, so someone had to. But there are a lot of bill requests, so this is our regular reminder. Please be talking to your legislators and finding out what they're thinking, just in general. Just what are they thinking? But also, if you have legislation that you are working on a legislator with, if one of these 770 bill files is one of your bills, please let us know so that we're aware. We want to make sure we're collaborating and not working over each other on that one. With that, Carson, let's talk about research.
Thank you, Justin. All right, so Cam alluded to the state auditor research earlier. Well, both the state auditor and the legislative auditor. Some of you have already seen the development fees survey. I know that's been kind of a point of discussion with some of the city managers, but you should all be aware that there is right now a dashboard, publicly available dashboard, that ranks cities. It just compares last year's, it was just year-over-year fee revenues and expenditures for specific development fee codes. I know the issue has been raised with the auditor's office that those codes don't necessarily align. They're aware that there's some issues with how they're collecting data, and there's some conversations with other stakeholders to try to figure this out. But just be aware, and I didn't include some of the red cities, but the first red one on the list is something to the tune of $60. So obviously these fees are meant, like some of these fees are for multi-year projects. It's not as simple as just like a year-over-year comparison, but just be aware that this dashboard is out here. I can give you the link later if you want to see it, but it's misleading, and I think it provides kind of a harmful narrative for what's going on right now. Second, legislative auditors focusing on housing affordability policies. They're totally distinct offices, as Cameron mentioned. They've been reaching out to some of your cities, trying to do a deep dive on the issue. I think they're genuinely interested in trying to understand the entire story on housing policy. They've had a really broad approach from the beginning. We've met with them kind of throughout the year. So just be aware, you'll see a report from them coming out sometime before the session, talking about local government policies on land use. It'll expand to some other sectors as well. Theirs isn't laser focused on local government, but they will mention it. Envision Utah, they're met with our board twice now. They're putting together some recommendations on local and state housing affordability policies. They received a grant from the Department of Workforce Services to do this research, and they'll be putting out recommendations. And I want to give a plug for them. They're seeking input from local governments. Their survey is open until Friday. There was a link in Friday Facts last week. We'll send another link in the survey email. Anybody can fill it out. If you're a city elected official, if you're a county elected official, if you're a city staffer, anybody's welcome to fill it out. So we really encourage you to go and do that. They've been earnest in trying to get feedback from local governments. Theirs is a pretty quick survey, just trying to understand what your preferences are. Guiding our growth. This has been, hopefully you've all seen this survey. Hopefully you've all taken this survey. This is another effort by the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, trying to wrap their arms around the whole issue, get Utahns' preferences on growth. I think there are over 10,000 responses now across the state. But again, we expect these results of a report from the Governor's Office to come out sometime in September. So we kind of have this swirl of housing reports all going to come out at once. And I'm not sure, we've been working with all these groups trying to help fill in the story, make sure that they're collecting data in a complete manner, and trying to make sure that the results are an honest reflection of the status quo. But just be aware that some of these will probably be, some groups will try to weaponize some of these metrics and outcomes. So keep an eye out, we'll keep you posted. But this is why filling out our housing and land use survey is so critical. Now, if you're an elected official, you're probably scratching your head saying, what housing and land use survey? We've been focusing this outreach on the city managers. This is a pretty technical survey. We've been distributed to our city managers email list. It's been distributed in the UCMA email list. We've extended the deadline again to this Friday. We've only had 26 responses so far, but I just want to emphasize this is critical. If you're not sure, you can check with your city manager, but we'll start individual outreach soon. Last year, this survey is what informed that 111,000 entitled units number. As soon as that number came out and we could back it up with solid data, that changed the entire conversation of the capital around housing. Obviously, it created some other fires to put out, but we were able to pivot in a big way from the narrative that cities are just opposed to growth. The cities are dragging their feet on growth, and it really is critical that we're able to come up with that number again. So again, please, city managers will be reaching out to you. We'll do some more, try to coordinate some more with UCMA, but be aware we're trying to put this data together, and hopefully we'll be able to have a more comprehensive report. This one will probably take a little bit of time to fill out. If you have questions or if you need an extension, please reach out to me, and we'll make sure that everybody has the opportunity to submit it. This is our best defense against all of these swirling state research projects on housing. This survey will help us push back on most of the data points that we're seeing being collected right now at the state level. And this will just be from the city perspective. So we'll be able to fill in a lot of hostile narratives. A couple other research points that I want to mention. First, USU's, we're sponsoring USU's quality of life research again, working with them. They're, I think, even submitting an appropriation to try to get state funding for their research. That's really helpful as we're having these big growth conversations, trying to get real hard data on how growth is affecting residents' quality of life. There's additional research being done into in parks, fields, open space. We're working on that. There's a study put out by Utah Foundation at the beginning of this year, public safety, recruitment, and retirement. This was a survey that we started 3 years ago with Representative Gwynn to try to understand what policy levers you have that can meaningfully keep your public safety officers. We'll be launching the survey the next couple months, probably through your police chiefs. And then lastly, home ownership. This has been a high priority for league members, trying to figure out ways to not just create rental housing, but create owner occupiable housing as well. We've been partnering with the Utah Foundation. They're doing a deep dive and trying to understand obstacles to home ownership in the bigger sense, not just municipal land use, but trying to get a big picture of financing challenges, liability challenges, so that hopefully their report will come out and help us kind of have a path to figure out what other state levers there are to make owner occupiable housing more possible and more prevalent. Are there any questions on research before I pivot away?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I know we're well over time, and I apologize for that, but I just got word from Envision Utah that what they shared with the board this morning, they were comfortable with sharing with LPC. So I'm going to take 30 seconds and just do that. Envision Utah, on the research Carson was referencing, we'll have a report at the end of September. Right now, they're in the draft stages with recommendations. Their draft recommendations for local governments as of now will include smaller lots, more units per lot, smaller houses, with the huge recognition they said in the meeting today that that's market driven. Fourth, more mixed use development, which includes more housing in commercial areas, looking at the approval process timeframes, and then last, the offsite construction of modular housing. But one thing they emphasized in the meeting this morning was where initially they were starting with, should there be bills out of these things that could lead to preemption, they were now pivoting more toward, can we help local governments with recommendations, and local governments can figure out what makes sense in their communities. So I think that demonstrates the collaborative nature thus far, but I wanted to make sure people knew that that's the space that they're in with that report coming into September, and they just confirmed that we could share that broadly. Yeah.
All right, and Justin, I don't know if you want to go through key interface, but all right. Great. I lastly want to mention really quick, you can find all of the LPC information on our website, so you can register, get Zoom information for all the upcoming LPC meetings.
feel like I'm chasing you off, person, but I kind of am. We forgot to adopt the minutes from the May 15th, 2023 meeting, so I would. Thank you.
I move to approve the minutes.
And a second? Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And then the second is a motion to adjourn. So moved in a second. All in favor say aye. See you next time. Thank you, everybody.